Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Dark Depths, Blood Moon, Doomsday, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and TheEpicStorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Tales of Adventure. Get sweet legacy staples and much more at TOAMagic.com.
Hello, and welcome to episode 84 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Bands and Bros. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introductions and banter for this week, available in our Patreon exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access. And let me tell you, Brian said some hot stuff in this week's pre-show.
It's true. Shout out to our new patrons since the last episode, Stuart, Josh, and Brian. Not me, a totally different Brian, but they do spell their name correctly. With the rest of our patrons, we'll learn how I got kicked out of a Vegas casino at Magic 30. That story is told right at the top of the episode.
None of us have shit our pants live on audio or video today, so everything's going great. Let's just hop directly into the episode topics of today. We have gotten some requests to do a ban episode. We're not going to do that. You can have like a third of an episode or maybe half an episode. Blue Red Delver's really good. Expressive Iteration is really good. But the thing about this right now is that it's really hard to say something that we haven't already said before. Since Ragavan's banning in January, Delver has stayed good. Expressive Iteration has stayed good. So we're over a year now of Blue-Red Delver dominance without really the need to splash for another color. It's really hard to say things that we haven't said in video form or in article form somewhere along the way.
And that's okay. We can just collect our thoughts here because the folks do want to hear them. And I am of the opinion that Expressive Iteration is the card if a card needs to go, which, I mean, the Wizards of the Coast ban article that went out that spawned all these requests for us to talk about it. They said Delver is good, but it's beatable, and there is a established tier 1 that all sort of rock, paper, scissors each other in what looks like a healthy metagame. And I think that would still be true without Expressive Iteration. Like, Delver would still be good, but it wouldn't be the best aggro deck and the best control deck anymore. It would have to be actually settle into like the tempo roots of a Delver deck. And the fact that the best tempo deck in the format also gets a crushing Mystic Sanctuary multiple EI endgame basically for free, I think that's whack. But more than just Delver, I think that what Expressive Iteration is doing to the format at large looks kind of unhealthy. 4-color control, we're just at a point where any other engine you could be running is just worse than Expressive Iteration. Folks are warping mana bases to do it. A year and change ago at the first Legacy Pit Open, I played the first iteration of Loam where I was dipping into red off of just a Ketria Triome and just for some Pyroblast in the sideboard. And I had a main deck slot, and I was like, well, there's one red anyway. I could play one Expressive Iteration. And I felt very smart for doing that. And now we're just at the point where, no, you play 4 of that. That's your draw engine. I would play 4 EIs before I play the first Uro in my core Bant control deck. And red is not one of the Bant colors. So the Bant core of just Uro, Endurance, Swords of Plowshares, Brainstorm, etc. needs red to compete. We're in a format with Blood Moon, Wasteland, etc., which Legacy has the checks. So you could say the tools are still there and they're being played by tier 1 decks. And everybody's checking each other's boxes. I just think that Expressive Iteration is warping too many things. It's kind of a play it or lose kind of situation. If you're in blue, you want to find a way to get red into your deck as well. And it's also just the core card advantage engine of the deck that everybody hates.
As we record this today, Blue-Red Delver is 21.6% of the metagame according to MTG Goldfish. The second deck is Doomsday at 7.4%, so it is triple the second place deck. On top of that, if you go back and look at the Legacy Pit Open 2 results, one of the Doomsday decks in top 8 was playing Expressive Iteration. Let that sink in for a second. Like, it is actually bonkers.
I've played against Sneak and Show with expressive iteration. I have played against basically every combo deck under the sun trying out expressive iteration. And when I wrote an article recently about Delver, I just quoted the Dig Through Time ban announcement and just replaced the words Dig Through Time with expressive iteration, and it checks all those same block boxes. It's the problem of letting the blue decks reload for 2 mana at very low cost. And the Mystic Sanctuary that we have access to now, causing those to loop is nuts. I recently played against an opponent who mulled to 4. They kept land, expressive iteration as 3 of their cards. And like, you bet it was just expressive iteration, get another expressive iteration, get Mystic Sanctuary, loop the first one. And they got out of a mulligan to 4 off keeping 1 expressive iteration in that hand, which is wild.
Even Dig Through Time, you wouldn't have had the velocity on a mull to 4 to fill your graveyard with Delve cards to get the first Dig Through Time off the ground. The investment is lower. The deck building requirements are a little different because your curve wants to be low enough, but the fact you could play lands off of EI, every deck has lands. I was in Grixis Control, which is something I've been working on a lot over the last year. My initial impression was we don't want EI because many of our cards cost 3, 4, and 5. That doesn't matter. You still want to hit your land drops. 1 in 3 cards in the deck, on average, is a land, because I play like 21 lands in the deck. So that card is just always bonkers at any point, turn 3 and beyond. Because as long as you can make a land drop with it, it's worth putting on the stack. And just dig and bury. And I'm just playing for that card in Grixis Control now, when I was on 1 or 0 a year ago.
Brian referenced the BNR announcement, and reading it, I couldn't help but feel that you're putting a lot of stock into Magic Online results, specifically League play, because they mentioned that all play had a lower percentage. But if you look at the leagues, and I talk about this a little bit in the Patreon exclusive pre-show, people in leagues don't play Delver. It's essentially a safe haven for people to play their fun legacy decks. And then in the challenges, people, take the gloves off. They're ready to hit hard. Well, if they're looking at league play like they are challenges, it's certainly going to lower their percentage of Delver. That said, they didn't reference over those 2 weeks how the Legacy Pit Open was dominated by Blue-Red Delver, and there was another paper event that's escaping my mind right now where Delver did very, very well, and it feels like they're choosing not to look at certain things, or they're choosing to include leagues to water it. Like, I feel like they're cherry picking their numbers a little bit. Like, obviously I don't have proof of that, but it just feels a little bit disingenuous to me, especially when so many people have left the format waiting for a change, and they're like, well, the numbers say it's fine. And you're stuck in this prisoner's dilemma that I really don't enjoy.
Yeah, I don't know where their numbers come from. Obviously, they have more numbers than anyone else does, like actual Wizards of the Coast with all of the online data rather than just what filters out into the deck dumps and whatever. They do have more than us, but what they're doing with those numbers of recent exciting printings like Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Leyline Binding will shake up Legacy. Okay. Leyline Binding is the solution to the deck that plays Wasteland in it and Daze. Wasteland your Triome. Your spell went from costing 1 to costing 4, and if you ever get it on the stack, I'm going to daze it. That's the answer to Murktide Region we've been waiting for, apparently. Thanks for that, Wizards of the Coast.
All right, let's not get angry about Leyline Binding, because otherwise I'm going to talk about that for 20 minutes. Let's talk about some data. So, from Legacy Challenges in October, Blue-Red Delver had 17 top 8 placements. The next placing deck was Doomsday at 11, followed by 4-color Control at 8. So, 2 of the top 3 decks are expressive iteration decks. Surprised Pikachu face. And the other one is a deck that is just extremely hard to interact with and doesn't even want the game to go long enough to need to cast a source of card advantage like expressive iteration.
Yeah, like those are the 2 genders right now. It's expressive iteration and decks that are faster than expressive iterations card advantage can kick in.
Unquestionably right now, one of the best decks in Legacy is the Moon Stompy deck, which is kind of weird that is the case, but it's something that goes fast enough to go under expressive iteration so people don't have the time to dig to their appropriate answers. And it's also something that very well punishes the 4-color greedy mana bases. Because you can have, 4 Blood Moons and another 4 Magus of the Moons if you really want to go deep on that sort of effect.
it's so tough to be interested in this. And I'm not trying to like sound whiny or anything here. I mean, I probably come across that way anyway, but we say the same thing once a year for the last 3 years. Like at some point every year, there comes a point where Blue Red Delver needs something removed. And I feel like Wizards just decided not to remove something last BNR. And that happens a couple times each year too, but it just feels like we should be there by now. And we all love Legacy. My interest in the format's certainly gone down a little bit over the last few months. It would just be nice if we had something finally happen to shoot some life back into the format, get people interested again, that sort of thing.
I will respond to that by I agree with your point, though I'm not at the like, come on, what are we doing here stage that I was with Ragavan. I do think Legacy is completely playable. I, in fact, enjoy it when I go to record my Legacy video every week, every day. I'm not like, oh, here goes this shit. Gotta wade through this. I am genuinely stoked, and I get to do like we gotta try hard in the chat when I compare into Delver, and we just make a joke out of it, and then I try to play my game and beat Delver. EI is not Ragavan, it's not Ren and 6, it's not Treasure Cruise, it's not quite as offensive as those things, but I still think it's over the line.
It's the clear best thing to be doing in the format if you are a fair blue deck of any nature, or maybe even if you are a blue combo deck of some nature.
Right. I've been playing a lot of Modern, preparing for Magic 30, where Ren and 6 is still legal. And the deck that I chose after 2 weeks of hard testing was Blue-White Control, splashing Ren and 6. We're just tucking that buddy in the deck because we're playing Leyline Binding and some Triumphs anyway, and then it's not much to just cast Ren and 6 too. So it's literally Blue-White Control with blue Archmage's Charm as a 4 of in the deck, and we're curving Ren and 6 into Archmage's Charm. Playing Modern, it's like the two pillars are Ren decks and non-Ren decks. Are you trying to like blast through the Rens, or are you trying to grind on the Ren axis? And Expressive Iteration is also legal in that format, but since they banned Yorion, you don't need a second engine. Like most of the EI decks in Modern also played Ren. The one major exception being Izzet Murktide, which is held together by Expressive Iteration in Modern as well. And if Ren and 6 were to go in Modern, it would become EI. And just these 2-mana engine cards, these 2-mana engine mirrors. I'd rather play EI mirrors than Ren mirrors. It's the same kind of feeling where it's like, this is very obviously the best way we can draw a card for 2 mana, and we're all going to do it. Or we're all going to try to blast through it where it doesn't matter. And I'm just seeing a parallel there.
And I think in Legacy, part of the reason why everyone is just so sick of it is because like we've seen the same play pattern so many times. Like this is just Treasure Cruise, Ren and 6, Dig Through Time, Ragavan to a slightly lesser extent. Every time the Delver deck gets a like 1 or 2 mana source of card advantage, that like is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and the deck becomes too good and something needs to be taken out of it. We've all seen this before. We all know where it's at. We all kind of suspect that this card is going to go at some point in the not too distant future. And we're just kind of waiting out the clock.
Yeah, the game's still being playable is really the only saving grace here. Ren and 6 picking up Wasteland every turn when Delver had access to that was some BS. When Delver could Wasteland you and still cast a 2-drop off Deathrite Shaman, that was some BS. Or they just had Reach built into their mana dork for the mid and late game, and main deck Graveyard Hate. Just there's a lot of stuff that these other cards provide uniquely to Delver that we just talked about that have been banned. EI just gives you more Delver cards. It's kind of just 2 mana draw 2, which doesn't provide any other angles for the deck. Like Ragavan is a giant snowball. Take your cards, ramp mana. EI doesn't ramp mana. It doesn't fix mana. It doesn't provide Graveyard Hate. It doesn't, this or that. It just gives you more of the cards that are in your deck, so it is a little different. And it's exploitable in this 5 Pyroblasts in a 75 main deck. You just go after the EIs early or save them for the Murktides later. And there is some gameplay to that that's pretty interesting. Flusterstorm on a turn 2 EI could just end the game because they're about to miss their land drop and then don't really have a plan. They were counting on that. I've had success with that in Control Mirrors, just attacking the early EIs. There is play to it compared to these other cards. It's just, I don't like the games where I open against Delver with like 3 base access to 2 or 3 basic lands, 2 or 3 plow effects, and some sort of engine like Narset. And I'm like, kill your threat, draw a card, shrug off Wasteland, then lose. Because you drew EI in the mid game, and EI found Murktide with counter backup. The deck with the multiple 3-power 1-drops should not also have dig through time to reload. I think you should have to pick one or the other.
I also think EI promotes a lot of garbage time gameplay, where like one person has cast their second or third EI in a game, and you know that you've lost, but nothing's really killing you yet. Like they're just so far ahead. And so, like, if you want to maximize your, technical win percent, like, you're supposed to keep playing and chugging through that. But, like, it's so clear the game is over in most cases.
Yeah, in EI mirrors, you're usually an EI away from starting to catch back up if you have something like Uro in your deck. But if you are these other decks that I know Phil and Bryant, you prefer to play, like, if you're the combo deck trying to punch your window, or you got stuffed once and you're trying to rebuild, and then the EIs bury you. Your Thalia and Stoneforge Mystic get answered, and then you have like 3 lands Flicker Wisp, and then EI, and you're not coming back from that from a fair deck. So like it's kind of, you have to engage them on their terms or just punch through it, which is something that we've said a couple times already.
Something I've wondered a lot about is, I've mentioned this a couple times so far, but if leagues are this safe haven for no Delver, is there a way, and I'm just talking hypothetically here, I don't think this would realistically work, but if the Legacy community all decided like, hey, I'm just going to play Delver, if we can do this as a group, we all play Delver, make it a miserable experience for everyone, get the numbers high enough, would Wizards actually take action? It's something I've thought a lot about. Like, let's say for a calendar month, I just decided to play Is It Delver in both challenges every single weekend, and a couple other people did too. Could we get the numbers high enough to matter? And I've thought about this, and I think the realistic thing is I don't know if it actually would make a difference. And I end up looking at Vintage sometimes to see the numbers there. And we have Blue Tinker at 34% of the format. Granted, it is a different format, but Blue Tinker is up to 34% that we know of, because the data is a little bit skewed due to how they publish league results. How high does that number need to be for Wizards to show that they care? Because right now, Is It Delver's at 21.6%. When Top was banned out of Miracles, people were like, oh my god, 18% of the metagame, that's insane. But that's not even the highest we've seen Blue-Red Delver. So we've talked about that in past episodes where the goalpost is shifted, but at one point is enough of enough, and can you do anything as a player to change that?
And I think that win rate is more important than meta share. Like, if 50% of people choose to play a deck with a 50.5% win rate, that's not unhealthy. It's just people making a choice to play just like old Jund, with, it's just, you're just 49% against the field or whatever. 50% of people chose to play a 49% deck. That metagame is not bad. It's actually quite exploitable. The Wizards article said that Delver win rates are in the correct pocket. They didn't say meta share doesn't matter, but I would make that argument that, like, roll your eyes, I'm tired of playing against Delver is one thing, but if you're beating it 50% of the time, then we're in the pocket of healthy Magic gameplay.
How much of that do you think is Delver's the best deck, I want to play the best deck, I'm learning Legacy?
I think that approaching Legacy from 0, or I haven't played in a couple years, people should start with Delver. I just think that's good fundamentals. You'll know what True North is, you'll know what Legacy is really about, and then you can start extrapolating from there. Like, I really enjoyed Delver, and Thalia really messed me up. My cards costing 2 collapses the whole deck. I'm going to try a Thalia deck, or whatever. Like, but you want to know what that play pattern feels like before you flip it. Like, a lot of my deck building, when I get sent to brew or whatever, I'm like, well, I'm going to add 2 more basic lands in here because I know how that feels to just get ahead of days with a basic, and then our good spells start resolving. And there's just these like little pieces that you understand better by playing Delver that help you play anything else.
Everything that people have published in regards to like metagame health and data, like calling for bans from Delver or bans for EI, just like haven't worked. Like, we can post, X number of tournaments results, X win percentage, X percentage of the metagame, and like we're just kind of stuck with it. And so, like, you can either leave the Legacy format or you can play the format that you have. And as a whole, I am enjoying playing the format that we have, but every time that my opponent just plays a turn 3 Murktide Regent or like I get buried by that EI. It's just like, okay, I've seen this enough times. Like, I know how this goes. This portion isn't super interesting, and I'm ready for another alternative.
Yeah, I know I've made this comparison before, but when Grixis Death Shadow was at the height of its powers in Modern, probably 4 or 5 years ago, whenever that was, people were calling for a ban there. The counter argument was, this is a deck that interacts, kills you with creatures. You can see it, all the pieces of it coming. Like, it's not like, I have no permanence in play and suddenly you're dead. Like, there's no toxic gameplay about it. It's, I'm going to Thoughtseize you, put some pressure on you, Fatal Push your creature, and then cast a 7/7. And if you can't answer that 7/7, you will die in 3 turns to it. Is that a bad thing to have as the best deck in your format? Just a fair interactive creature deck, which I think is the argument to keep Delver around. Like the calls to just hit Delver, just hit Daze, just hit whatever, like take out something from the core Delver shell so we don't have to whack-a-mole every 1 or 2 mana card advantage engine forever. I think it is good to have a fair creature deck that you can interact with over multiple turns be the best deck in the format. It's just, there are little pieces that push it into too much.
I want Delver to exist as a deck. I love Delver as a deck. When Delver is healthy, I love playing against Delver, and I often play decks that are good against Delver, so I'm often happy in that regard. But I feel like against current blue-red Delver, in so many of my games, my decisions don't matter. Like, I can play an amazing, tight, technical game for 7 turns. My opponent draws EI, into Murktide, and nothing that I did in those first 7 turns matters. Or my opponent plays Dragon Rage Channeler into turn 3 Murktide Regent with 3 counterspell backups, and nothing that I did matters. I feel like current Delver is a little bit too good, but in no way do I just want to gut Delver like, okay, this deck is never playable again.
Going back to Brian's point about having a creature deck be the best deck in the format and how it promotes healthy gameplay, I do believe that there is a blue bias within the game of Magic the Gathering. If you look at a lot of prints where over time people are like, why is that a blue spell? Why did True Name Nemesis have protection from everything? Isn't that a white mechanic? Leovold, it was a white mechanic and then they made it blue. And then we had Narset later.
Should be a white card for sure.
Exactly. So Snapcaster Mage, that was literally the card Recoup. And then they just went and made it blue. So I do feel like there's this blue bias in Magic where people are like, oh, yeah, a blue deck should be the best thing because blue's the best color. Should it always be that way? And I don't necessarily disagree with Brian's point about how you want the best deck to be something that, you know, you could see it coming from all that stuff. But like, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever if a combo deck could be the best thing that you could be doing. It very rarely is. And if it is the best thing, people are usually a little bit more vocal about wanting it removed. It's just the nature of the game. People don't love combo decks, and I completely get that. I am in the minority in that, regard. But Delver's been the best deck since 2010, and it's always looked relatively the same. I mean, maybe you can take out the Miracles era in there if you so choose, but even during that time period, Delver was the second best deck. It's been around forever. I don't think it's going to leave, but I'm not necessarily against hitting a core piece, because I think even if you hit the core piece, it's still going to be tier 1. The deck as a whole is just so solid that you could hit a core piece, you could hit a Daze or Expressive Iteration, and I think the deck is still going to be just as fine. We've heard people during the Oko era being like, well, if you remove Oko and Dreadhorde, it's going to fall off. Please. We saw how that worked out. People are just very hyperbolic about what the deck can and can't handle, and you could say the same thing about what I'm saying right now, but the deck's always been around. You could hit a number of cards in the deck, it's still going to be there.
Yeah, I always think back to the era where Maverick, Esper Stoneblade, and Rug Delver were like the trifecta at the top of Legacy. I played a lot of Rug Delver in that era, and the deck was powerful. You did have your Delver, Stifle, Daze, Wasteland starts. Like, Delvering people will always be something the deck can do, but then sometimes you just got chaliced, or you got stuck behind a Batterskull, and you had to like really aggressively cantrip for your one of sideboard Ancient Grudge. And if you find it, you get the Batterskull and the Jite. But if you don't find it, you lose. Or like you really get stuck behind a Thalia, or like I thought that era, or Stifle didn't line up with their draw and Stifle was a card in your deck. Like, I thought that era was really appropriate for all the players involved.
That was an awesome time of format.
It was. And I think that is at Delver right now with all the tools that exist, like Prismatic Ending, Endurance, like Veil of Summer, Galvanic Relay, like all these things that just punish fair blue creature decks. I think if EI gets nixed, Delver could land back in that pocket of this is a powerful thing. Sometimes you Delver people, sometimes you get stuffed, and they really have to work hard for their cards because all their cards are so good. They shouldn't also get just the best 2 out of 3 of them multiple times throughout a game.
The European Legacy Masters ELM is an invitation-only event where the best Legacy players from across the continent face off to determine the European Legacy champion. Behind this project is a group of European Legacy enthusiasts that want to see the format thrive. The inaugural edition of ELM will take place in Bologna, Italy, alongside Four Seasons Tournament on December 3rd, 2022. This event will be streamed on twitch.tv/Four Seasons Tournaments. The first edition will feature a mix of Legacy players who have qualified throughout local tournament play, plus special guests including Andrea Mengucci, Javier Dominguez, and Gary Campbell. Go to EuropeanLegacyMasters.com for more info or follow at EU Legacy Masters on Twitter. Brian, thinking about that era, Spell Pierce was a main deck card in Delver at that time. So was Spell Snare. In talks about banning days hypothetically, and this isn't going to be a ban days episode, I'm just talking out loud here. In those discussions, people are like, Delver would just fall off the face of the planet, and I've mentioned, hey, you could go back to playing Spell Pierce or Spell Snare. Those were effective cards at one point. People literally laugh out loud. But I think those are actually like still playable cards. It's just that they've been power creeped out. And if you played them again today, they're still very effective. Like Sneaking the Show still plays a bunch of Spell Pierce. The card is still very good. It's just that you have Force of Negation now. You don't need to play those effects. There's just so many good options that we have that where those are still fine cards.
Honestly, I love Spell Pierce, and every time I build a control deck, I'm like, how do I get a Spell Pierce in here? And the thing that turns me off of it is Expressive Iteration, because everybody is hitting every land drop every game, and Spell Pierce falls off now harder than it ever did. Like, playing around Spell Pierce was always like part of things when that was a card that was played in the format. If you don't hit like the first EI or the first Narset, you're hitting nothing. Because like at some point people would get stuck at like 5-6 lands and stop playing them because of Brainstorm or whatever, or they just weren't drawing them anymore. Now control mirrors end with 12 plus lands in play, where Spell Pierce really isn't doing anything. Even if someone double spells, they still have 4 mana left over. Uro's kind of a culprit in there, like the Uro and EI decks, where you're getting all the lands and deploying them twice as fast. If EI was not in the format, I think Spell Pierce would be better. And I know that's not exactly what you're talking about, but it dovetails into back to the core issue here of everybody's just has too many resources.
You bring up a good point, because I've been in my head, I've been in love with Spell Pierce and Pauper recently, which is why I thought about mentioning it. And in that format, you don't have access to Uro and Expressive Iteration, so that actually makes quite a bit of sense.
Okay, so on the note of like resources, I played a Death and Taxes League recently, and someone in the comments was like, why weren't you wastelanding the Delver player? And I was just like, you can't wasteland Delver anymore. That is not a reasonable, rational line to take. Because if you spend one of your land drops wastelanding them, and then they just get to 2 lands, cast an EI, get their 3rd land drop, you're so far behind. So like, I had like 2 wastelands in play, and they were like, you had 2 wastelands, why didn't you just use them? It's like, no, they're going to come back from that. They can rebuild for 2 mana so easily. Like, I have to use my resources doing other things. Like, I have to try to play around days when I can. Like, I can't make their cards better by taking away my own resources to 1-for-1 fight them when they can 2-for-1 me so well.
Yeah, Delver being a 19 land deck where 4 of the lands are Wasteland and 1 is Mystic Sanctuary, it feels like they're playing 32 lands. I have a constant theme throughout my videos is I'll put like 1 or 2 Wasteland in some control deck to deal with, Merit Lage, Caracas, whatever I'm worried about, Urza Saga, and it'll just be in my opener, and Delver will go Volcanic Island Dragon's Rage Channeler. And I'm like, well, I could Wasteland this, try to cheese them, or I could cast my Uro on turn 3 off of Wasteland's colorless mana. And every time I'm like, I'm going to try to cheese them, I lose every single time. And it's not just results oriented. It happens when it's happened enough that it feels bad. It's no, literally they cantrip so hard and actually dig out so hard. Because the Ponder finds the 2nd land for the EI, which finds the 3rd land. And I've had games where in my 23 land control deck, I Wasteland Delver's 19 land deck, and they hit land 3 before I do.
And as an offshoot of that, from turn 1, when I play against Delver, I say, I lose this game if they find card name. And often that card name is Meltdown, for example, or another similarly narrow sideboard card. But from turn 1, I know that if my opponent digs to their card that is in their sideboard so that they can beat my deck, they will win. And they dig so hard. The normal cantrip suite plus EI plus Dragon Rage Channeler, so each one of those cards gets one deeper, means that they get to find those cards super consistently. And a lot of times when I win games versus Delver, I'm just like, oh, they didn't find it after they looked at 35 cards.
I'm going to bring up a point here. I've been playing a lot of Modern Lotus Breach, and one thing that I've noticed playing that deck is it's a 4 Mishra's Bauble deck. I just went down from, a year ago I was playing 21 lands. I've been playing 20, I just went down to 19. Because one thing that I've realized is even though I'm a deck that can't win the game unless I sacrifice 2 lands, Mishra's Bauble allows you to get away with playing less lands. If you look at Rug Delver from the era that Brian was talking about with Maverick and Esper Stoneblade, or Esper Deathblade actually, that's what it was called. It used to be an 18 land deck that ran 3 Tropical Island, 3 Volcanic Island, 4 Waste and Fetches. That was the mana base. That's how everyone built it. And then over time that shifted, it adjusted, and now we're up to 19. But the thing is, these decks, on top of playing Expressive Iteration and Channeler now, are playing Mishra's Bauble. So they're more likely to find their land drops consistently, especially when you have that Channeler to surveil on the first turn. Or you get the Bauble on turn 2 off of the Expressive Iteration. And I feel like Bauble here is sort of like the villain in the background pulling the strings sometimes, where because everything is so broken around it, you don't look at it, but it's actually doing a lot of work.
Yeah, I think Mishra's Bauble, it's seen in various numbers. Some of the builds are on the full 4, like the Modern deck, and sometimes there's like 1 or 2 as a flex slot that enables Delirium and lets you get real nasty with Expressive Iteration. If you have actual 0-cost spells in your deck, you can EI on turn 2, actually get both cards off it, which is pretty messed up, especially if you set it up with a Brainstorm and you know it's there. Those lines do exist, but I think that Mishra's Bauble has existed since, 2008? 2007, whenever Cold Snap came out.
6.
06 maybe. It like that card is not new. We never really cared about it until we had Delirium on a 1-drop. Just all these Graveyard Matters things on hyper efficient threats, and this dig through time that cares if your card costs 0. Like I don't know, like maybe we really didn't figure it out until modern players broke it and then we borrowed it, but that card is it's been around and hasn't really been played until we see all these support pieces.
Yeah, I think the support pieces, like the things like Emery and Dragon Rage Channeler that came later, really powered up that card. But I think if you played Legacy from X year, I think we would see a lot of newer tech incorporated into those older time period deck lists. Miracles is a classic example where it was like, oh, how many ponders do I want to play in Miracles? Like, I think I'll play like 2. I think that's fine. And now it's like, no, every blue deck, like 4x Ponder, 4x Brainstorm is the starting point.
I think about it sometimes because right now Delver, there's really 2 flavors. There's the Delverless Delver, and then there's the versions that actually play Delver Secrets. And if Expressive Iteration were to go, I think you might see the 2 variations meld together, where you just see Ledger Shredder and Delver Secrets in the same deck, since Ledger Shredder can provide you with that late game card quality that Expressive Iteration does. That said, it does require you to put a little bit of work into it. You have to play spells like Mishra's Bauble that have synergy that go, or the anti-synergy that go against your Delver Secrets but help your Shredder. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could see a world where those 2 versions meld together.
Yeah, putting the work into it is the gap that EI is just slamming closed. My big revelation from the Legacy Pit Open, the more recent one, where I played Sharkstill, I constructed this whole deck full of basic lands, full of efficient removal, and I think my Delver matchup is positive. I don't have thousands of matches of data to prove it, but it feels good when I play it, makes sense on paper. But at the end of the day, it came down to, why am I building a deck around trying to draw 3 cards in this really weird and exploitable way with Standstill, when I could simply put more red sources in my deck and cast Expressive Iteration? Like, throughout the tournament, sometimes it's like I end a turn Swords to Plowshares, untap, play Standstill and feel like $1,000,000. But other times in the tournament, my opponent had Urza Saga in play and Standstill rotted in my hand, where EI for an answer to Urza Saga would have been exactly what the doctor ordered. Like, why would we do anything else in a control shell than cast EI right now? It just doesn't make any sense. And forget about Delver and Delver dominance. Like, EI is also homogenizing. Like, when's the last time you saw an accumulated knowledge? That card was nice for a while. Or even like predict. Like, people used to have to work for card advantage, even in control decks. Jace the Mind Sculptor's completely unplayable right now. We can just get 2 mana, spend 2 mana at any point in the game, and look at 3 cards and take the best 2.
I do think that you went into a Snake's Den knowing that the DC greater area has a lot of Tabernacles, which means a lot of Urza Sagas, and you went with Standstill. So I feel like you sort of got the short end there. But on top of that, if you look at how that event played out, Doomsday Crush, and it's like, oh, really? Doomsday's good against the Urza Saga decks. That's crazy. And you just happen to be the wrong triangle that weekend. I think that your Sharkstill deck is very good. I have to imagine it's pretty good against Delver based on what I've seen, but maybe you just didn't get the matchups.
I beat lands once, lost to lands once. My 3 losses that I missed day 2 was Red Prison. In game 3, I could beat any lock piece, or I was fast enough to beat War Boss. I could not beat exactly turn 1 Rabble Master. And that was the thing that they had. And just, play draw magic. I win that game on the play. I win that game if my draw steps are a little friendlier. I win the game if they have a different card or choose to make a different play. Is what it is. It's in the range. But my winning in for day 2 on camera was against Delver. And my deck is rolled up with point and click white removal, Supreme Verdict. There's all this shit that just keeps the board clear. I board in a bunch of Pyro and Hydroblasts, and you can see it on camera wherever they store their VODs. It's we get to a point where the board is clear, and my opponent starts casting Expressive Iteration, and I die quickly. While my card advantage engine, like, I think I drew like the Standstill the turn after they drew the first EI, so they had like EI'd into EI into drop a threat, and I'm just like, Standstill. If this was EI, I would EI into EI and answer your threat. But instead, I can't even cast the card that I built my deck around. And that, not that I'm advocating for Standstill, like, I know what year it is. Like, I can do better, and I'm just off Standstill as long as EI is a thing I could be doing instead.
I think the final thing that I want to say about EI here is that EI is hard to fight against. With like a Treasure Cruise or a Dig Through Time, you could shut off the graveyard, and that stops those things from being sources of card advantage. With EI, you basically need a 1-for-1 spell to answer it, usually something like a Pyroblast, and EI dodges common blue hate. It dodges the Chalice of the Void that you're putting on 1. It dodges Spirit of the Labyrinth because it's not technically card draw. The card exists in kind of this weird spot where it naturally avoids some of the things like the Hull Breachers and the Narsets that are preying on other portions of Legacy decks.
Gentlemen, let's say you are Ian Duke, you are writing the next BNR announcement. What changes, if any, would you make?
I would ban Expressive Iteration and no other cards.
I would ban Expressive Iteration, and I would consider nuking Murktide Regent as well. I just think that card is very far above the curve of legacy threats. But like, if you're putting me in charge of it and it's like ban 1 card, it's Expressive Iteration without question.
It could be Murktide if you want it to be. It's an open-ended question, however you see fit.
Yeah, like if I'm picking 1, it's Expressive Iteration. If I get to pick 2, I'm taking Murktide with it. Like, take no chances. Like, just adjust the metagame so that we get a breath of fresh air in there.
I think that banning a creature that has power and toughness as like it's the whole reason to put it in your deck, even if it's a lot, even if it's above rate, just a creature with power and toughness would be tough to put on a ban list in a format where like Show and Tell is legal and Tendrils of Agony is legal. Like the shit that we get that can answer just a creature with power and toughness or go way over the top of it. I just want to see a world shakeout where it's not that easy to reload your graveyard after the first Murktide, or a world where Rest in Peace is good against Delver again. It's like Murktide is a 7 mana 3/3. Dragon's Rage Channeler is never delirious, and you don't have EI to dig for an answer to this or an alternate win con. I want to see that world for a little while.
I don't think Rest in Peace beats Murktide Regent, basically ever. Like,
a 7-mana 3/3 as a legacy card to you?
no, what I mean is, I don't think the person who's planned to beat Murktide Regent is cast Rest in Peace. Like, I would be betting on the Murktide Regent player most of the time. Like, there's a very large difference between shutting off the graveyard on turn 0 with Leyline of the Void and casting a Rest in Peace on turn 2 that is like Dazable, Spell Pierceable, Force of Negationable, Force of Willable. Like, I'm still betting on the Murktide Regent deck there. And Leyline of the Void usually isn't good enough either. Like, it's great when it works, but that deck is so good at digging towards the Brazen Borrower to bounce that out of the play that, like, by the time you get to, like, turn 6 or so, like, that Murktide Regent is just back in play, even if you started with a Leyline.
Back in previous iterations of the format, playing various blue-white X decks versus Rug Delver, where the Rest in Peace knocks Tarmogoyf, Hootie Mandrills, Nimble Mongoose. Like, there was a lot of graveyard threats out of that deck, pre-Murktide as well, and Rest in Peace plus Red Blast answered every threat in Rug Delver for a while. People started playing Hex Drinker just as some other way to deal damage against the blue-white decks. Just like with EI around, I agree. Like, spending 2 mana on Rest in Peace when they can just, okay, whatever, EI, dig till I find some other way to win. I don't know. It's just like not even a conversation right now because the tools are there and it is laughable to talk about. Like, I don't play Graveyard Hate other than Endurance against Delver. I'm not going to bring it in specifically in basically any deck.
I think the one big difference between the scenario you're describing and this one is that if the Murktide Regent is already in play, your Rest in Peace is actively bad.
Oh, yeah, big sucks.
Yeah, like, versus old Delver decks, like, you drop that Rest in Peace, holy shit, that is a game changer. Because the future threats are bad, and the current threats are bad. And a Rest in Peace now doesn't accomplish that.
Yeah, in no universe am I advocating for a world where, like, Rest in Peace is your whole plan. You're going to have Swords to Plowshares in that deck too, or, you know, Solitude, or whatever. It's like it could be a conversation of a tool against this theoretical deck that doesn't exist because EI is legal.
One thing that I think to myself a lot about is pre-Modern Horizons 2. Expressive Iteration was out a full month before Modern Horizons 2 was released. It was already the best deck in Legacy pre-Modern Horizons 2. It was at 18% of the metagame. That number is burned into my head. I will never forget it. And then Delver got Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Murktide Regent. We saw Ragavan leave the format. I think a lot about what would Delver do if Murktide were banned. And I think there's really 2 alternatives. Well, 3 now with Ledger Shredder. So you go play a Ledger Shredder with Bobble. You play Sprite Dragon for an aggressive role. I don't really view Monastery Swiftspear as an option. I just don't think it's viable. I'm sorry. Or you go back to playing the Whale. All of these seem considerably worse than Murktide Regent. And I can't help but think, with the cards gained from Modern Horizons 2, would Delver still exist? Because I do believe Endurance does a number on the deck now, where prior, there wasn't really anything good out of the green decks to fight, you know, Delver Secrets, and now we do have Prismatic Ending, we have Endurance. The Euro decks are a lot better now than they were then. So I do think Control might get to bully Delver the way that they're supposed to if they didn't just have Expressive Iteration. So I think right now I'm leaning towards Brian, but I mean, I'd love to see 2 cards banned. And I have a good matchup against them, but like I really would like to see 2 cards banned, but I think 1 would get the job done.
I have seen the argument from the non-blue, non-removal players, like the Goblins experts and like the Prison experts, that wedge of the format. Their job is to stop the things from arriving, not really interact with them once they're there. Murktide Regent is the house against those decks, where even like Chalice into Trinisphere, it's like, I fired off a Ponder before your Trinisphere came down, then I can just tap 3 mana to cast 2 spells into your Chalice, they both get countered, and then cast a 7/7 Murktide on like turn 4 or whatever. And 7/7 hits you 3 times, races your Rabble Master or your Karn, picks off your Karn, like whatever. Like that version of the format, like you're digging up to Muxus, your Vial's ticking up, whatever, take 7. I can see Murktide being particularly frustrating in those instances. But from the interactive decks, Like Swords of Plowshares, Pyroblast, they don't care how big your creature is. Teferi, bounce it, Jace, bounce it, whatever the hell. Like, I'm in for all of that. Tendrils go over the top. If you're not trying to add Nas, a 1/1 and a 7/7 are the same thing as long as you still have 1 life left. There are folks impacted differently by Murktide Regent as a card that exists.
Yes, and as, the resident Chalice player, creature deck player, like, this is why my opinion on Murktide Regent tends to be stronger than that of my co-hosts. Because I tend to be in the seat more often of, like, my opponent played a Murktide Regent, now I can't win. And it's very unsatisfying. If it happens every now and then, like, it's not that big of a deal. But when Delver is, what are we at, 20% of the metagame, 18% of the metagame? What's the number at right now?
21.6.
When it's at that high of a metagame percentage, and it's just like, oh, turn 3 Murktide Regent, I lose. Oh, top deck Murktide Regent, the last 7 turns are just invalidated. It's pretty feel bad gameplay.
If you combine the decks in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, it does not equal the percentage of Blue-Red Delver.
Yeah, Murktide, it's certainly large. There is no debating with that. I'm still struggling with the idea of just banning a creature whose text includes power and toughness.
Ultimately, even if you take out both EI and Murktide Regent, I think Delver is still a very real legacy deck, very likely still a tier 1 deck of some nature. Pauper has fired off a lot of bans recently, and I think they're able to kind of do so very easily because, like, the format is so affordable, both in paper and Magic Online. In Legacy, like, if you ban critical cards from a deck, and that deck disappears, someone might be out a $2,000 investment. I don't think, financially speaking, Delver players are going to lose out majorly on any sort of ban on any card that's possibly bannable from their deck. Their deck still exists. Their deck is still full of staples that are transferable to most other blue decks.
I would also like to address something real quick since we brought up the Pauper bans. It happens every single time any of us ever talk about bannings. All three of us are, as far as I know, our opinions have stayed the same on a possible legacy format panel. That has not changed. Part of the issue with that is, let's say one of us is on the format panel, hypothetically, and something like Murktide Regent gets banned. You now have a name that's accountable with the fact that your Volcanic Islands just dropped $60 in price. And that is a tough thing to swallow for a lot of people. And there's a finger to point, and that ends up being a big fail bad. That person could be a hero to you, but the public faces do get villainized, and I think that's just something worth addressing, where it's a tough position to put people in.
I think that the price of Volcanic Island has almost nothing to do with Legacy. That's a commander card. And I don't think the price would change. If anything, commander players would be like, oh, sweet, there might be some shaking loose from Legacy player hands. Like, I do know personally a number of members of the CAG, that's the Commander Advisory Group, for those of you not familiar. Yeah, their Twitters are frequently unusable. Like, one of the CAG members will just tweet, like, I really hate losing to this. And then immediately the replies are like, if you ban that, I'm coming to your house. Like, straight up threats or vitriol. And it's like, nobody said that. It's just not my play style. I don't know what your problem is. But yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna lose a bunch of money. I would be more worried about the price of Murktide Regent itself. I don't know what that card costs. Is it like $20? I don't know. Like, losing that $80 is more likely than taking a peripheral hit on Volcanic Island.
Murktide Regent, as of November 1st, 2022, is $11.65 according to TCGplayer.com, who is not a sponsor of this episode.
Okay. So that's cheaper than I thought it was, but still, like, $45 to a Magic player could be a lot. Everyone's in different spots. I know in the scheme of Legacy, Delver is probably several $1,000s, and each of those $1,000 is Volcanic Island. Like, it's probably 4K just in the 4 Volcanic Islands. We got to be close to that world at this point. Yeah, just bans costing money. Pauper can move a little faster. Also, Pauper, the panel has moved quickly on a number of things that were very obviously big problems, where I think Ragavan would have been banned faster if we had a Legacy panel, but I don't know that Expressive Iteration with this current situation would be much different, because it is not obviously a problem. It's just likely a problem. Like we just spent an hour talking about how I wish this wasn't here, but also gameplay is pretty much fine. I don't know. If I were on this panel, which I would not want to be if it existed, because that sounds like thankless and terrible. If I were on this panel, I would have a hard time pulling the trigger on EI, even though I think it should go, which maybe makes me a coward.
Does that have anything to do with the environment that you typically interact with Legacy? You are someone who records a lot of leagues of Magic the Gathering online for content. Does the Delver not being in leagues affect your decision?
And this is the thing you've said several times in the episode that I just don't agree with. I feel like I hit Delver once or twice a league. We get I just recorded a league where I went 2-3 and both of the wins were against Delver and I lost everything else. We get to celebrate that. Or the league I recorded today, round 1, game 1, just Volcanic Island Delver. It's like, all right, we're right into the cannon. Let's go. I see Delver all the time in leagues.
Yeah, I do too. We don't see Delver in leagues at the same concentration that like you might see playing in challenges, but it's still there, right? Like I have played very few competitive events in the past year and a half or so, and I am still running into Delver at least once a league on average.
Yeah, compared to a Swiss tournament, a 9-round Legacy Pit or 8-round SCG, I expect to see Delver 3 times in my 8 rounds, where a league, if I see it once, it's on expectation, twice kind of annoying, but I fully expect to see it. This Delverless league universe that you live in, I'd like a piece of that because I'm not seeing it.
For what it's worth, we started the pre-show with Phil talking about how he hasn't faced Delver in 50 matches. I really don't face it that often in leagues. I really don't. Like, maybe once every 10 matches, if that.
Yeah, I mean, it's jarring. Like, when I play leagues, it's like I said earlier in the cast, it's like, oh, we gotta try hard. Someone playing Delver. Gotta farm your 3 treasure chests today. Blah, blah, blah. Tough guy. Like, that is a meme on my channel. But if you want to be better at Legacy and practice for your events, the leagues are where you do it, and Delver is a good deck to play. And those people are out there. And then there's also just like the easy money marksman or whoever the fuck who I know is going to just be on Delver every time. And I queue into those sort of people as well.
Something that I think about a lot is like, we are the 1% of Legacy players, right? Like we are playing more matches than the vast majority of Legacy players. We are playing at a higher level than a lot of Legacy players. And for a lot of people, Legacy is going down to their local shop. You know, they drive 5 minutes down the road, they play with their same 10 buddies that they're always playing with. And when you make rules changes, when you make banned and restricted announcements, you have to be catering to people like us and the people who are playing the format much more casually. And I think making changes to a format in a way that reflects all the players of that format is particularly tough. And I have a lot of respect for the Commander Advisory Group folks in particular, who really have so many differing groups to work with. Because even if you just like kind of browse Legacy Twitter, there's very, very different takes on how healthy and how fun the format is right now. It is a wide range.
Us being like the 1% of Legacy players, you, listener, right now in your car or on your couch or mowing your lawn or whatever you're doing right now, you are in that 1% as well because you engage with a Legacy podcast. The large number of players are not content creators or even content consumers. They are just folks who own some dual lands from the 90s and want to play without having to worry about what's legal and standard right now. And I was one of those people for a long time as well. Seeing really the strings that EI is pulling when you're at that local level where 12 people show up and 9 of them are going to be on the deck that they own. And then you might have 3 who like to get creative every week or mix up their deck choice compared to just like, or maybe you do have 1 out of your local 10 to 12 people who just shows up with, is it Delver every week and farms? Who knows? But I think that all of that needs to be considered. And even considering all that, EI should eat a dick.
Hear, hear.
I'm Phil Gallagher of Thraben University, and I'm Brian Coval of Make Bryant Look Like an Asshole.com. 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 Asshole.com.